Hi guys, welcome to my video series on chord tone soloing. In this week's lesson, we'll be talking about guide tone targeting, which is another form of note targeting. Stay tuned. This week's lesson is not so much for the jazzers, but more for the rockers and the blues guitarists. When talking about guide tones, chances are if you play jazz, you already know what guide tones are. A chord is made up of the root, the third and the fifth, the 1, 3, 5 if it's a triad. When it comes to seventh chords, it's made up of the 1, 3, 5 and 7th. So the guide tones are the third and the seventh. Guide tones are essentially the characteristic notes of the chord, and they specifically define the sound, the quality of the chord. As such, they are sometimes called your color tones. It is because of this that guide tones are more harmonically important than your roots and the fifth. Why is this important? Well, if you want to talk about chord tone soloing, by focusing on the thirds and the sevenths, the guide tones, right, it will make your lines a lot more colorful. Most jazz music emphasizes a lot on the guide tones, and training your ear to hear these guide tones will make you more accepting of jazz music. For this video, I will concentrate on a jazz and the blues context. Again, I think this lesson is meant more for the rockers if you are interested in expanding your skill sets into other musical genres. Most of the time, when we're dealing with rock music, we're mainly concerned with playing only in one key. So for instance, if the song was in E minor, then all we would do is be soloing in the E minor or G major scales, and no matter what we do, no matter how technical, it will only be drawn from that one singular scale. We even apply this to blues by simply applying the minor pentatonic or the blues scale starting on the root note of the one chord, even if we don't know why exactly it works. But the truth is, music like jazz and blues actually changes key, sometimes after every bar, sometimes after every 2 beats. This is the main crux of why a lot of rock guitar players find it difficult to learn other musical styles, because we are so used to working with only one key. And when that key changes, everything we know breaks down. Also, most rock guitar players have not figured out how to change keys smoothly enough to make the transition musically effective. Okay, let's start with this chord progression, which is sometimes called the circle of fifths progression. What it basically is, it is a 2-5-1, okay, that has the major 2-5-1 as well as the minor 2-5-1. So in C major, starting with the D minor 7, the G7, and then C major 7, which completes a major 2-5-1. And then we add an F major 7 chord, right? And then now we play a minor 2-5-1 in the same key. Therefore now it's a B minor 7 flat 5. And then an E7 flat 9. Okay, this is an altered E7. And then A minor 7. So that completes a minor 2-5-1, and now we complete the progression with an A7 chord. So this resolves back to D minor 7. Right. Now, if we were to focus on the guide tones, okay, using this progression, the guide tones are on the top 2 strings, which is the second and the third strings. So if we were to play D minor, the guide tones are these 2 notes, okay. Then when it comes to G7, it's the chord tones on the same 2 strings. Okay, then when you go to C major 7, so you have okay, now when we go to F major 7, okay, B minor 7 flat 5, 7 flat 9, and then A minor 7, and lastly A7. So you can essentially even just play these two notes of each chord, right? And that gives you the guide tones, okay? Now, two things. The first thing, if you hear just the guide tones, it has a particular melody to it. Right? And in this particular example, it sounds like a familiar song that you might know. Like say, fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Right? So if you know this song, it sounds like that melody. Okay? So okay, just talk a little bit. When I was in college about 15 plus 16 years ago, I remember my teacher, he was teaching us on improvisation. And what he's taught me at the time, it didn't really make sense until much later. He was saying, when you start your improvisation, keep it simple by just trying to adapt the main melody or what we call the hit of your song. Okay, so like in this case, just now that was the hit. Okay, and try to adapt that by adding additional notes. Okay, but what he didn't tell us, or what he didn't tell me, was that the hit melody, the hit of the song, already has the guide tones in there. So by learning a lot of these jazz songs, it sort of like ingrains the sound of the guide tones of the song into your mind. So when you want to start your improvisation, use that as your starting point and then adapt it. Okay, and by doing so, you're already focusing on the guide tones. Okay, so now I think a lot of, I guess, jazz guitar teachers probably tell us this, which is important to learn a lot of songs. But the thing that's sometimes they forget to tell us is that why we do so is because it trains us to understand the guide tones. Okay, so now back to the example. If we learn this, which is what I call your mini melody, right? Which are the guide tones. And you create a solo by adapting this mini melody into your own lines, then you're basically soloing using guide tones. The problem with this approach, right, as I showed you, right, these guide tones are played from here. So your chord progression is sort of like cascading downwards. And then it repeats back up here. And why this is actually difficult if you apply it this way, because your underlying scale changes 3 times. So for instance, when you're over here, right, you're playing, see the A minor scale? Then when it comes to over here, you're going to G mix sol Lydian, right? And then when you go to, when you end up over here, it becomes E Phrygian. So you sort of like have to transverse across 3 scale boxes. Now, what I've been teaching my students is, instead of doing that, let's try to keep everything within that 1 scale box, which is, okay, your A minor, C major scale on the 5th position. So let us adapt that same mini melody from the guide tones. So the first 3 chord guide tones still fall within your A minor shape, but when it comes to your F major, right? Instead of playing it over here, play it. So now you're actually still keeping these guide tones of the F major 7 chord in your scale box. Okay, and then the next one. Okay, so with that, then it becomes easier to solo. Right now we'll stick to just the A minor scale. Okay, theoretically it is correct for 6 out of the 7 chords in this progression. Okay, over by rights, over the E7 flat 9, you should adapt this scale melody, but I'll talk about that later in a later part of the course. Also for your last chord, your A7. But for now, for our learning process, we'll just stick to this, right, and assume it can work. Actually, it can work. Okay, I'll explain a little bit. Okay, so let's start with, say, your first guide tone pair, right? So you start off with that and adapt that melody to your next line, and then use your ear to connect it. Right, hopefully you can actually hear a little bit of that inside the melody, the lines, and as if it's outlining the chord for you, albeit just the guide tone. Now, let me give this example over your actual chord progression. Something like that. So essentially, we are trying to create a melody on guitar based on a melody that we've already heard inside our ear. So by adapting that mini melody, and sometimes you can hear this as the head of your song, that helps us to craft a melody based on guide tones. So next step, let us take a look at what other variations that we can get from this.